kind of interesting these days with your kids, and you hear about and you see it actually around the course. We want to vicariously live through our children, and you want to have tennis rackets and golf clubs and rugby balls in their hands really fast, and you see these young prodigies getting driven quite firmly. Was your parents? It sounds like you were doing your own driving. You were taking yourself out and playing golf on a regular basis and repetitive basis rather than being told to go out and do that?
Yeah, you're right about that, Leo. I loved playing sport, and it was a bit of an escape because it meant that if the more sport I played, there was less time to have to do homework. And I tried pulling that one on. Mum, Dad understood, but Mum wasn't going for it, and so I had to find a little bit of time to do some schoolwork. But so that was my theory. I didn't quite get away with it. But yeah, look, I loved it. I loved playing golf, and mostly loved it too much, to be fair, to the point where I gave up playing other sports at a young age, and I regret that now. Yeah. I do. I wish I'd kept on playing cricket. I couldn't play rugby. I had nephritis, had a kidney condition, and so I just stopped playing rugby when it started becoming a little bit more physical. And so I couldn't play rugby, and so I played tennis and played softball and did a lot of athletics, and golf was still my number one passion by all means, but I mostly zeroed in on it a bit too early, and that was more my own doing. I loved it so much that my mum and dad had to yank me off the golf course and stop me from practicing, rather than the other way around. And I know there's some cases where parents are maybe doing a bit more of the driving of the kid as opposed to the kid controlling their schedule. And I mostly put some of the injuries later in my career down to spending so much time hitting balls or practicing or playing at those ages where I was doing a lot of growing and developing, and my body got just a little bit out of whack, and consequently I think I built some patterns in those development stages of my career that became a little bit more difficult to unravel later on in my golfing career.
So move forward to 1988, and it's actually not too far forward because you must still have been very young then when you teed up in the New Zealand Open at Paraparaumu Beach. 1988 was my first memory of the New Zealand Open. I lived not too far away from here, but I remember going up and watching Ian Stanley win that particular year. You won the Bledisloe Cup that year for the leading amateur, which is how old would you have been?
17. Yeah.
Did you have to qualify? Did you have to go to Waikanae the Monday before to qualify to get into it? What was your pathway to get into it?
I think I was in the Eisenhower earlier that year, or maybe it made it into the national team, and so I think that might have been my exemption.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's your memories? I mean, 17, teeing it up in the New Zealand Open.
Yeah, it was a golf course I hadn't played before, but had heard a lot about, and so I was keen to go and learn it and figure it out, and the void of links style golf in New Zealand meant that you didn't have too many courses to compare it to, or to practice different kind of shots on. And I guess I was fortunate that week that the weather was relatively kind, and which meant I didn't have to learn a different style of golf so much to do well. I can't remember what I shot, but I can remember
288. So
yeah, okay.
I think so. 74, 75, 73, 74, kind of each of the four rounds. It was
Yeah, I mean, I remember learning a lot that week, and just being in the environment of professional golf, full stop, and playing I think it was my first New Zealand Open. You're exposed to some of the better players in this region of the world, and so that was a big learning experience. In reflection, I realised that I needed to learn a few different shots to play links golf well, and to play in the wind, and to be able to control your ball flight, and
what about controlling your nerves? I mean, as a 17-year-old, and I know you wouldn't have had the biggest galleries sitting around you, but you're still teeing it up in a national open. There's no putting a circle around your card. It's every shot counts.
Yeah.
And I guess this goes for the remainder of your career as well. How you actually dealt with nerves and teeing it up in front of crowds and the like.
Yeah, nerves were more from excitement than being concerned about people watching you play. I was a bit of a show off as a kid, so if people were watching you play, then they I guess I was excited by that, and realised later in my career how much of a privilege that is, of course, if people would come to watch you play sport for a living. So I can't remember at a young age there feeling nervous about that. Most definitely excited, and I remember playing on the last day. I think I played well on the last day, and coming up the 18th hole, and in some respects you could draw a parallel as a 17-year-old in New Zealand playing in a national open. It was like, imagine this is what this feels like. Imagine what it feels like walking down the last hole at the Open.
Yep.
And grandstands around and crowds and the claret jug on the line. That would be really cool. And so it was more absorbing all of that and looking forward. As a 17-year-old, most of the time you're looking forward, right? You're not thinking about what just happened or what you're worried about screwing up. You're thinking about the graph's going this way.
Yeah, not every 17-year-old. So
no,
yeah.
No, but that's kind of what it was for me, and so I didn't generally have too much trouble with controlling my nerves at that stage, and they were there, but they were more out of how cool is this? This is exciting. This is what I play and practice for, to actually put myself in these situations and see how I do.
So 93, you won the Bledisloe Cup again at Paraparaumu Beach when Peter Fowler won it with a similar score. But I guess it was the year just prior to that where you were absolutely catapulted up onto the world stage and probably one of the most dramatic ways with the Eisenhower Trophy. Incredible opportunity, obviously an incredible vision by Grant Clements, and a culmination of a plan that he had set for that whole team. I mean, talk us through that whole experience.
Yeah, it was. I certainly didn't understand it at the time, just how much it meant to a number of people, and I think in the years after that, certainly when coming back to New Zealand, I realised that sort of achievement, a lot of people were invested in it. And when you're a little naive, you're a little young, and you're just playing golf, and it's a stepping stone to getting to the next stage. Maybe you didn't truly appreciate it and really soak it in. But look, I basically shouldn't have even been on the team. To be fair, I had an elbow injury, a displacement of the ulnar nerve, and had surgery about 14 months before the tournament, and that required me to have 3 months away from playing golf. And then when I came back, I was only worth about $2.50. I was bugger all, and so a fair bit of work went into trying to get my game back competitive again, even though I was kind of still around the high performance squad, as they would call it nowadays. The Titleist Academy, I think it was back then. There were other players that were playing better than I was, and for Cambo and Grant Moorhead and Scarsy, they mostly picked themselves on their performances over a long period of time, and there was maybe one spot up for grabs, and a couple of things just started to turn the corner. My dad passed away, Leo, 2 years prior to the Eisenhower, just before the Eisenhower in Christchurch in 1990.
Yep.
And I was denying myself a chance to grieve that, and so that meant me bottling up quite a few things, and just I wasn't dealing with them, and consequently not my golf game was going backwards, and I was at a bit of a crossroads. I was in my teenage years. What the hell was I going to do? I intended on going to university in the States right before Dad passed away, and then I was doing a bit of part-time work. I was trying to do some studies, and I was a bit all over the show, to be fair. And so just caught up with a really good friend in Hamilton, and just kind of started talking things through, and just how much I missed my dad, and it just started taking a little bit of a weight off my shoulders, and there are a number of things that went into that, but things just started turning the corner, and I started playing just a little bit better, and won a couple of tournaments, and I guess got myself in front of the selectors enough for them to make a decision and take a punt on me, and they did do that in the winter of that 92 year, and so from once I got selected in the team, which I thought was a pretty big achievement from where I was a few months prior to that. I knew the other guys were going to play well. Cambo had been playing great. Scarzy and Grant were winning just about every other amateur tournament there was in the country for the previous 12 months. And so my goal was to try and beat all my teammates at Eisenhower. And if I could do that, then I was going to contribute as much as I possibly could to the team by playing that well. And if I did that, and knowing how well they had played, it was most probably going to give us a really good chance of winning. And so my goal was to try and be the low individual that week, and to try and beat all my teammates in the process of doing so. And
so
blow me down if it didn't pan out that way.
So you were the low individual, and obviously the team did win. And I mean, put that into context. Who were some of those players that you were playing against that year? I mean, who were some of the Americans in the team?
Yeah, David Duval and Justin Leonard were the two young guys. At that time, the US had a policy that they had two college players that would make the team, and then there were two career amateurs. And so the older guys were Jay Siegel and Alan Doyle, who would go on to play the Champions Tour later in their careers. And Messieurs Leonard and Duval most surely don't need too much introducing, so they had pedigree. But there were, I haven't spent too much time actually since going back through that field, but there are a number of very successful professionals from a number of different nations that were playing that year that went on to have winning careers on both the European Tour and Japanese Tour and Australasia and in the US.
So in terms of career back at that stage, doing that on the world stage, did that lead to, I don't know, people floating around in the background offering opportunities, scholarships perhaps opening up, or equipment companies? I mean, how did it all work back in those days?
Yeah, yes is the short answer to that. And I need to come home from the Eisenhower and kind of take a look in the mirror and figure out, okay, well, what path am I going to take here? And ultimately, I decided, no, look, even though we'd done well that week and won the team competition or won the individual competition, still felt like there were things that I wanted to achieve in the amateur game, and so felt like and some development that needed to take place. I was, I needed to work on my game. I just needed to improve different facets of what I was doing. Need to grow up a little bit personally too, and so I remained amateur for another 12 months, or nearly 12 months, and the other three guys turned professional. And so a lot of different opportunities come at you when you're considering that turning pro phase, and certainly if you've done that on the back of some success. And And so I know for Cambo and Scarsy and Grant, they went straight to the Australasian tour, and they all kind of had some success early on, and were playing for money. And I came home and played the tower at Mount Maunganui. and so the next year though, I played pretty much a professional looking career as an amateur. I played in a number of professional tournaments, some amateur tournaments. Big goal was to win the New Zealand Amateur, and that was at Namutu the following year. But kind of bridged that gap a little bit. I felt like the gap from where I was at and where my game was at and where I wanted to be at launching my professional career was just too wide. I needed to do a fair bit of learning, and so used that year to try and just get a whole heap more experience under my belt and enable me to make some decisions around agents, around sponsors, around what tour that I wanted to go and try and base myself on.
So that's interesting. Once you did make that decision, there's a couple of different ways you could obviously go. Well, a bunch of different ways, but I mean the main, the big light ones are the European or the US tour. Obviously the US tour is probably the harder road. Well, I guess any tour is a tough road in itself, but the Kiwis that get through onto the US tour, probably few and far between if we look at history. Yet that's the course that you set for yourself.
Yeah. And I was fortunate enough to play a little bit that 93 year amateur tournaments and professional tournaments, both in the US and in Europe. And so got to have a little bit more of a look at both of those tours, and intended on going to both Q schools, actually, to be fair, and try and have a buck each way. And I was exempt on the Australasian tour, so by winning the New Zealand Amateur. So I had somewhere to play over the course of the summer, but wanted somewhere to play year round. And so that was my goal, was to try and get either on the European tour or the Challenge tour or the PGA tour or what was then the Nike tour, and try and have somewhere to play through the winter months in New Zealand, and then come back and play in New Zealand and Australia through the summer. And the route to go and play in the States was simple for me, in the sense that, hey, look, if I want to end up playing there, I may as well go and figure out what it would take to get there. Not in a million years did I think that I was good enough to get through all the way, but if I was going to fail at some level, let me find out what that level was going to be, and what I could go away, work on my game, and then come back and have another look at it at a different stage. And as things turned out, I managed to get through all three stages that first year. And in '94, I was the youngest member of the PGA Tour, just over 22 years old at the time, and hadn't played anywhere as a professional around the world other than a couple of Q schools. I'd ended up not going to the European Tour Q school because I made it all the way through to the finals of the US Tour school, which gave me some sort of status on either the Nike Tour or the PGA Tour. And so didn't end up going to the European Q school. And so I guess I fast-tracked some things by getting to the tour in my first year. But it was a really, really steep learning curve at the same time.